Available now at whitepillbook.com.
And there's nothing going on tonight. We could pay for the city light. Or maybe just get drunk and stay inside.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. This is the last episode of the year. And when Christmas is coming along, New Year's coming along, everyone's busy and they don't want to record podcasts. So I thought it'd be a good idea to be like, who haven't I had on in a while? And I'm like, I haven't had Tom on forever. Tom Woods, host of the Tom Woods Show, the most popular libertarian podcast ever, author of, I don't even know how many books you have to your name if you count your free ebooks. It's got to be what, 30, right, at this point?
Yeah, if you count the ebooks. If you don't, it's still a respectable dozen.
Yeah. And a not so respectable six others. What's your most recent book that you did with a publisher?
Oh, with a public, because I did do one book self-published in 2014, but in 2011 I had a book called Rollback about basically just I mean, I think the book should have been called Why Everything Should Be Abolished, but they don't listen to me.
And I thank you for dressing up. I like that.
Well, I got this tweed jacket in Scotland, and I just love it.
What's that? Herringbone. That's the term. Herringbone, the pattern.
Yeah, I guess so. It's so-called Harris tweed. And so I thought, hey,
Yeah.
you know, when in Rome, so I bought it.
So what I want to talk to you about was with the launch of my new book, The White Pill, things that you have been white-pilled about in the past year and in the forthcoming year. One of the things which is, I know you and I are both kind of weird about this, but keep our private lives private, but like you were married this year. That's a pretty big white pill. And I know married life is suiting you very well. I'm friends with your wife, Jenna, as well. You two are thick as thieves. It's just really cute to see the two of you together. So that's got to be the biggest one on your list, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I was wondering if my personal life is part of it, because certainly that's the biggest white pill of the year, and she is an unbelievable person, and everything's going great in terms of my personal life, like my relationship with my kids and all this put together. It's maybe the best year I've ever had, and certainly professionally, by far, it's the best year I've ever had. And yet the world is in the, frankly, shittiest condition, and in some ways, right? I mean, I know you're going to remind me that some good things happen over the course of my life. Yes, I get it. But it's harder for people to be optimistic in 2022 than it was in 2019, let's say. And yet for me personally, when I look at my limited circle, I'm pretty content, but I'm still spending my time trying to fight against all the bad things that I see.
Well, I'm going to push back a little because you just said 2019, which is accurate. But I was one of the people, and I got a lot of pushback about this on Twitter, which is where I go to hear from, people in general, other than my locals group, which is it's a lot easier to be optimistic in 2022 than in 2020. And I was of the belief, and I was wrong, and let's you and I get into this, that mask mandates everywhere were never going away, that if anything, they were going to be escalating, that it would be a point where like vax mandates would be everywhere and escalating in perpetuity, that voting, they would do everything they can to abolish in-person voting, that they would have taken what they did in 2020 and ratcheted up a significant degree. The mask mandate on planes, for example, was struck down by a judge. And though there was some shaking fist in the air by the Biden administration, it did go away. And they did not fight back against it particularly hard. Those were things that I was surprised about. Now, people are freaking out about me like, oh, they haven't gone away. They're just waiting to reinstate them. And that's true, just like with banning assault weapons, right? As soon as they had the opportunity, they would do it again. Point being that ban expired. And yes, they would. There's no question that if they had their druthers, they would do it again. But the point I have is that they haven't. Are you surprised that there's been any receding of the COVID nonsense?
Here's the thing that surprised me the most. It hasn't happened in the US yet, unfortunately. But what surprised me the most was how quickly, for example, international travel was restored in places like the UK, where they just got rid of their vaccine requirement for entry. Because I thought to myself, and doesn't it make sense?
Wait, I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. This is rude. I just want people to understand the US is one of the very few countries left where you have to be vaccinated to enter. which
Right.
is so shocking when you think Canada has a more liberal than we do, but that
Yeah.
is the case. People might not realize it because I hadn't realized it. Sorry,
Right.
Tom, go ahead.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But think about it. Nobody's political constituency is non-voters from other countries who are
Yeah.
unvaccinated. That's nobody's political constituency. So I thought they would be the last to get a remedy. They would be the last to be thought of. Why would they lift the vaccine requirement to get into these countries? It's necessary for their narrative. And then one day they just did it. They just did it. And I think this is, what you're saying about the mandates not persisting and some of the black-pilled people telling us, well, they're just biding their time. But the fact that they feel like they have to bide their time is itself something, because some people were telling me that none of this would ever change. Nothing would ever go back to the way it was. And I said, I don't quite see it turning out that way. And it didn't turn out that way. And what it reminds us of is, even though, I don't know what the percentages are in terms of people who went all in on the COVID stuff, people who kind of didn't know what to think, and the people who were dead set against it. I don't know what the breakdown is, but I do know that there were enough of us who wouldn't go along with it that I think many people decided they can't prosper without us. Restaurants in New York cannot prosper without sufficient international, well, they're still dealing with not enough international traffic, but the domestic traffic, people weren't going to go if they're going to be subjected to these requirements. And even, native residents of New York weren't going to go. And I think they realized, because we held out and said, I'm not going to be part of this, that they had to break down and abolish these things. And that, if that's not a white pill, I genuinely don't know what would be.
Well, I don't think it is a white pill in the sense that it's like if they asked for 100 and they ended up with 25, it's still progress in the wrong direction, right? But what I was regarding it more as an example of where I'm freely admitting that I was wrong. I really thought we would still have, here in Austin, which is a very blue city, there would still be, everywhere you go, 70% of people masked up. I thought on planes and going anywhere, if I go to New York, they're going to be checking, because I was in LA over the summer and they were checking those cards. Really, they were scrutinizing them. It wasn't like someone just doing their job, like, yeah, whatever, like checking IDs, and they don't care if an underage kid gets in with a fake, right? They were looking and checking the dates. So I was surprised by how much of that has receded, how quickly. Your hypothesis as to why is a plausible one. I think what you and I don't appreciate, and probably never will, is to what extent corporate America and lobbyists were calling up people in the administration and Congress saying, hey, this is hurting us because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that is, for better or worse, people do understand that is often much more efficacious in getting the administration or Congress to change their mind than you and I and all of our listeners kind of, protesting to the contrary.
Right. So for me, in all this, the white pill would be pretty much as follows: that in order to get to, now, as you say, that's right, there could absolutely have been corporate pressure, but I really think there was at least a solid 30% that was just saying, I'm just not complying with this.
I think that's fair. 30 is a good number.
And I won't go vacation in some place that's doing it. And so just to know that despite among the largest propaganda campaigns that was global, that silenced dissidents and that ridiculed you if you weren't on the team, that there would still be enough people who didn't believe it, that we could actually get things done, that we could actually amount to a roadblock to them. The way I was looking at it, it was very, very discouraging. I thought for sure people would be screaming 2 or 3 months in, and it looked to me like, for at least for a while, I was very pessimistic. And then I realized, wait a minute, there are more of us than I thought. And that's something.
Well, and I think it also, what happened is, as every day that passed, the propaganda lost its efficacy. And as you looked at places like Florida or other places where these restrictions were lifted and you weren't seeing mass carnage, it's that much harder to persuade someone. It wasn't Jonestown, right? Like, it wasn't like you go to Miami and there's just bodies everywhere on the floor.
Right.
It's a lot harder to persuade normies or people who are politically uninterested or unmotivated to be like, if you don't get this for your toddler, you're going to kill your whole family. And they're like, but I have friends in Florida. Like, they're telling me the contrary.
Not to mention, I don't know if you saw the interview that Tim Robbins, the actor, did with Russell Brand just recently, where he said he had the same experience. He said, well, over there in the UK where they're starting to loosen up, they're going to have devastating consequences. And then when he saw they didn't, he said, oh, well, okay, maybe I have to rethink this, which is, the reaction of almost nobody, unfortunately. But also the Florida thing, what I always say is, as a thought experiment, if we think back to March 2020, and we were to say to people who were the most panicked, what do you think would happen in a state that more or less disregarded these compliance measures? And they would have said carnage, right? Total carnage. And yet Florida, when you adjust for age, was actually better than average. So nobody in March 2020 would have predicted, oh, probably that state will wind up better than average. So if they're being honest, they have to admit this did not turn out the way they would have predicted. Not one of them would have said in March 2020, oh, it probably won't make much difference if a state doesn't abide by these. But apparently it didn't. That's the thing, as you say.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Pettisy.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying, Jonah Goldberg, Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So one of the other, so you wanted to talk about your new ebook on national divorce. Is it an ebook, right? Nationaldivorce.com.
Yeah, I at least wanted to mention that I actually bought nationaldivorce.com, which, by the way, Michael, was not my usual $10 purchase. That was a premium one. But I own nationaldivorce.com, and that's another white pill, is that there are a lot of people talking about it. Apparently, there's one poll, I don't know how accurate this is, that has half the Trump people being in favor of national divorce, which would have been unthinkable to have that big of a chunk of people considering.
Well, it would have been unthinkable to have it be asked. This is
even
what
to
I
have it
think
be, because it was not talked about. It's not allowed.
Right. People need to appreciate how the Overton window works. If you have pollsters asking people, do you believe in this policy, right? Now, a lot of times the policies out there, it's to demonstrate no one believes in this, right? But this is hard because it's not something that ports easily to good guys, bad guys, because they try to make it out that national divorce people are these neo-secessionists, neo-Confederates, right? But then you have Californians and, New York and people in the Pacific Northwest who are also like, why am I sharing country with these people who want to kill grandma and so on and so forth? So if you look region by region, it's I think the number is about a third. But the point also is these movements gain in popularity as a function of gaining in popularity. So when it's something that like 2% of people believe, if I'm joining in on this, I'm a freak, I'm a pariah. There's a social cost for me. I'm at a party or at work and I say, hey, I believe in this, QAnon. I believe Trump is still the president. And, he's governing from Mar-a-Lago and passing bills and there's getting mass arrests. If I say that in an office, I look like a loon, right? But if I have a view that's being asked by USA Today and 30% of people agree with it, that's a very different scenario. Then it's like, okay, I don't agree with this. I haven't heard this, but it's a lot more socially acceptable. And the more socially acceptable something becomes, the easier it is to actually implement.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's happened in this case, because you could, of course, there's a lot of ways in which it sounds scary and weird, precisely because it's not talked about. But you just think about it as, as it relates to other relationships in your life. If you're in a toxic relationship, you don't say, well, the solution is for us to just keep fighting about this forever. Let's just keep fighting. Or if you're employed by some firm that treats you like garbage all the time, or you just don't see the world the way that firm sees it. Right. Well, you don't necessarily think, well, I'm morally obligated to stay in an abusive relationship like that. No, you say, well, maybe it would be better if you went your way and I went my way, and we just see who winds up with the better society. That's all we're saying with this, is that's what you would do in any other part of your life. Why wouldn't you do it here?
There's a couple of counter arguments to this that I would love to hear your thoughts, and some of them are, I think, really dumb, and some are smarter than others. To me, the one that sometimes you hear an objection and you're like, I can't even wrap my head around your thinking to begin to answer this, is who would get the nukes? And let me say why I think that's really like a really dumb objection, because it's like if you and I had a business, right? And as part of we're co-owners, we want to separate. And part of the business would be, we own some dry cleaners, and we own some laundromats, and we have a fleet of cars. And we sat down, we said, who would get the cars? Well, yeah, that's the point of negotiations.
Yeah,
There's several
right.
scenarios, which is I get them all, you get them all, I pay you, and you pay me, or anywhere in between, or we sell them and we split it, or you get 70-30.
Right.
The point is, it's all on the table. The idea that the nukes are like a one item that has to be only held by one entity, I don't understand. Or the idea that this has to be a precondition to entering negotiations, I frankly don't understand that as a question.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a matter of where there's a will, there's a way. If we want to have this happen, we'll figure out some way to dispose of that. And likewise, people might also come back with, well, what happens to the national debt? Are they just going to repudiate their share of the national debt and we all have to pay it? Or how does that work? Well, again, there have been cases of secession where countries have sat down and said, all right, well, here's the national debt we have, and here's the relative share of GDP held by the various sections that are involved, and we'll just apportion it that way. I mean, I don't really care that much about the national
Wait,
debt.
hold on, but what about how America got founded? This was the big issue. Boston, I think, paid off all its soldiers. Some other states hadn't paid off their soldiers. They're like,
So
what
they
do we do
argued
about
about this, right? And then they came up with a compromise.
There's a precedent in America
Right.
of what do we do about different parts of the country having an equal debt. And they fought it out and they argued, but it was resolved to the point where people don't even remember this happening.
Yeah, that's right. So these types of things. Now, then you get conservatives who will say, but what about all the people you're leaving behind?
Yeah,
If
right.
we
That
were
was
to
my next
break
question.
away from each other, well, there are always islands of resistance in various other, let's say, blue states. Then what about those people? And the answer to that is, well, you keep trying to help those people. You whatever you can do, you keep trying to help them. You keep making good arguments. You keep making documentaries. You keep writing books. Keep doing interviews. Whatever you can, you do what you can. But in the meantime, you try to take as many wins as you can get, and you can get some wins. And as a matter of fact, California, if they want to be a crazy progressive state, they can be as crazy progressive as they want through national divorce. But at the same time, you say, well, what about all those Californians who are left behind? All right, well, they keep fighting the best they can, but we don't persist in an abusive relationship because we don't have the answer to every single possible objection. I know that instantly there would be places where their lives would be vastly improved if they could just make their own decisions and not feel like the U.S. government is going to second guess them all the time.
Yeah, one of the arguments I hear from boomer conservatives, God bless them, is, well, I'm not going to cede an inch of this soil to the
Right.
left, right? And it's like, what is your plan for taking back Portland? Like, just even theoretically, like everyone in Portland, let's suppose that some 80%, or 70, whatever, some huge percentage genuinely believe in some hard left to medium left version of progressivism as their governing ideology. How are you saving them if this is what they want? So maybe you could have those 30% of people have, they can come citizens elsewhere, but unless you're planning to literally occupy Portland and invade and keep it under some kind of Civil War reconstruction thing, Civil War is exactly what national divorce is meant to avoid.
Yeah, that is exactly the case. Because the alternative is people with obviously incompatible and warring ideologies just keep battling it out forever. And especially now that we've gotten to the point where we're dealing with some issues that involve children, well, no one's going to yield an inch on this.
Right.
And so what is going to be the result of this? If not if not civil war, then a low intensity kind of civil war of the sort that we see pretty regularly now. It used to be every 4 years, but now it's pretty regularly. So I like to consider ideas that have been off the table, because generally the ideas that are officially on the table are all lousy. The range of opinion that's allowed to us is pretty narrow. And
Wait a minute.
Like
Is it a table or is it an index card? Make up your mind, Woods.
but you know what? But even beyond all this, I mean, there are things that made me happy about 2022, for instance, that involve you, my dear Michael Malice. For example, in 2022, I would dare say you have broadened your reach even more than you did in 2021 and 2020. I think you've become even more mainstream, and I mean that as a compliment rather than an insult, in that, because you haven't yielded anything, But you and Dave Smith now are talking to Dr. Drew. Like, what is going on here?
Did you wait? Let me tell you about that. That was really that was my favorite moments, and here's why. There's this amazing Simpsons episode, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where Rodney Dangerfield was playing Mr. Burns' long lost son, Larry, right?
Yep.
And Mr. Burns is having dinner with Larry at his Mr. Burns table. It's like 10 meters long, and Homer's there with one hand. They're eating the food, and Homer's being Homer, and Mr. Burns is not having it. And he's like, Homer, does your son ever bring over people and like force you to entertain them? And Homer's like, yeah, you know this guy Milhouse? And like the idea that Mr. Burns would know who Milhouse is. But it was really funny because why you bring this up, Dave Smith was on Dr. Drew's podcast, Dr. Drew After Dark. And Dr. Drew's like, hey, you know this guy Michael Malice? And
I saw it. It was great.
And Dave's like, yeah, I know Milhouse.
Yeah. That was excellent to see you both there. And you're always on shows with big audiences. You have a massive Twitter following. You have this brand new book out. Like, I mean, I think whatever is good for Michael Malice is good for America.
That quote will haunt you within 2 years. But can we talk about something else? Because something you work on a lot with your content is to encourage people to thrive and succeed in their own lives. And there is this streak in the liberty movement, which claims that if anyone is successful, then definitionally, they're not really a threat. I think the hierarchy goes, so I forget what the first one is, then it goes grifter. But when you're too successful to be a grifter, because other grifters listen to you, you become controlled opposition. And there's no space in their mental or political model for people to be both successful and a threat in any way to the regime. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't know how poor people are going to be a threat to the regime, right? How I would like to be somebody who has the resources to amplify his voice. And so the more resources I have, the more I'm able to do that. So there is, unfortunately, some of this in the libertarian world. You also see it, by the way, in another circle I have traveled quite a bit in. That's traditional Catholicism. I'm a better traditional Catholic than you because I'm dirt poor. That goes to show that I'm harder core than you. Sorry, I don't get that. So in other words, you're saying there are more resources in the hands of people I despise, thanks to me, because I refuse to claim any. I don't know. I don't go for that. But what we and not to mention, right now I have a bunch of products that I promote that I'm very proud of that I've created, and I would like help promoting these. So I have an affiliate program, so people can sign up for the affiliate program. They get a special link, and then if anybody buys one of these things through their link, they get half the money. I mean, it's a pretty good deal. But yet I look around the libertarian world and I think, how many people have audiences that that they would actually use for that? They would actually say, hey, go look at Woods's thing so that they can, they can make half the money. And it's almost nobody. I have almost no libertarians with a big enough audience, especially an email list. I can think of 2 libertarians who are really good affiliates for me. And it would be vastly better for the libertarian world if we had a whole bunch of people with thriving, responsive audiences. And yet, unfortunately, we don't. And I run into a lot of libertarians who are almost angry at those people who have built email lists, who have learned how to sell things. They act like selling things. They have this communist view. It's like I always tell them, take your hammer and sickle elsewhere. But there's something underhanded about selling something to people because it's always manipulative and wicked. I don't know if this is some kind of weird projection or what, but if you want to have a completely ineffectual movement, then don't learn this stuff. Don't learn how to create something people want, how to promote it to them, how to have an affiliate program. Yeah, by all means, don't learn those things. But if you want a thriving movement with successful people who have the resources to fund all the projects you spend 24 hours a day begging for money for, then we should encourage this stuff. I mean, after all, Harry Brown wasn't just the Libertarian Party nominee. He was an outstanding, notoriously good, outstanding salesman who wrote a book called The Secret of Selling Anything, which Gary Halpert, who's one of the great direct response marketers of all time, said is the best book on sales ever written. Sales, a libertarian, so let's return to that tradition.
Well, it's also kind of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged is like, and The Fountainhead were both blockbusters, which decades later are still selling insane numbers. Is that somehow nefarious? I'm just reminded of my favorite moment in libertarian history, though, of course, Rand did not identify as libertarian, when she was on Donahue and a woman got up and asked her to her face if it was true that Atlas Shrugged was written by the Illuminati. But it is kind of, well, I mean, let's speak to that Catholicism thing without getting too deep into the weeds. But isn't a lot of Catholicism informed by this idea of a fallen world and a suspicion of pleasure and wealth? So it would kind of tie into that kind of ascetic undercurrent.
There definitely, obviously, is an ascetic strain. There's no question about that. But then, if that is what you want to believe, then you can give your material possessions away to people who need them.
Yeah.
And then, incidentally, if we're always supposed to think about you have to help the poor and help the poor and help the poor, how exactly propose I help the poor? With what? Material resources, right? Is that what you're asking me for? Material resources? So why is it okay for them to demand material resources? So obviously, nothing wrong per se with material resources. Who's going to give them to you? The bum on the street or me? And I will just simply say there are some people who are in the know, but for quite a while I used to call myself the secret. What did I call myself? The secret benefactor of suffering libertarians. Now I can't. Now that I've said that, I'm going to get all these emails from people saying I desperately need such and such. I can't do it. It doesn't work that way. It's like Oprah. I have to come to you. Right? You can't submit your book to Oprah. She has to read it and come to you. But it's given me great pleasure to be in a position where I see my friends are in a tough spot and there's nobody who can help them, but I can help them. Like, how is that bad? I don't understand how that could be considered bad. And if we think of it as bad, then we're just like Bernie Sanders. And I did not join this thing to be at least even implicitly like Bernie Sanders.
It just reminds me of Rand's "What is the value of money?" speech from Atlas Shrugged.
Beautiful. I love that speech.
Where she talks about you only, in a free market, you only have money by providing people with something that makes their lives better, with giving them value. It is a testament to the fact that you're a creator or creative person, that you've provided something that people need or want, and there should be no shame in it whatsoever. If you're selling a product that is helping people with their, I mean, it sounds like a joke, but I'm serious. If you're promoting a product that helps people sort out their emails when they have too many emails, they're better off.
Yeah.
The company's better off,
course.
and you're better off.
Yeah.
No one, it's win-win-win.
And not to mention, obviously, there's nothing I can do about the history department at Yale University. But in this day and age, even with all the deplatforming that we have to deal with, in this day and age, I can open my own thing, which indeed I did 10 years ago, libertyclassroom.com. And I recruited a bunch of professors I trust. And of course, I teach some of the courses myself. And it's like a dashboard university. You can consume the courses at 3 o'clock in the morning if you want to. And it's all the sorts of topics that you would either get in a distorted fashion or not learn at all. Anything like U.S. history, European history, Austrian economics, all this stuff taught, again, by reliable people who don't hate your guts. Now, again, I can't fix Yale, but I can reach thousands and thousands and thousands of people through this. And in exchange for what you would pay for one community college credit hour, you can get dozens of my courses through Liberty Classroom. And when I launched that thing, now, by the way, 99% of people who interact with this thing, they love it. They say this is an amazing bargain and it's a great quality product and I'm so glad I have it. But when I first launched it, I had poured $50,000 of my own money into it. And I had a handful of people saying I should have given it away for free instead of charging for it. And I thought, oh, if only Ayn Rand were around here to give one of her fantastic character speeches to these people. So in other words, I was just supposed to swallow the $50,000 loss so that a bunch of cheapskates can't, cough up half a day's pay for this immense amount of resources. No, go screw yourself. I don't care about people like that.
Imagine if you spent 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years, putting together a 5-volume, like the Liberty way of looking at the world, and it was comprehensive like your program is, right? Would anyone expect those books to be free? Like, why is that any different?
Or not to mention, there are people now. I give away a lot of free stuff, right? Just like you, I have a free show on a regular basis. There are thousands of Tom Wood Show episodes that I don't ask for a cent for. I'm constantly giving things away. But I do promote things too. Like in my newsletter, I have a lot of news, and then at the end, I promote something. And there's a sliver of people who get annoyed by that. And to pick up on your analogy, if I were a traditional terrestrial radio host and I went to commercial halfway through the show, nobody would say indignantly, I will never listen to that again because he promoted something. For some reason, that's okay. But if it's in a newsletter, this really irritates me. It's the same principle. You get some value, and then I throw a pitch at you. If you don't want the pitch, don't take it.
Yeah. Um, I want to hear
By the way,
your
can you
thoughts.
tell that I've thought this through a little bit over time?
Well, it's. I think you have to deal with this more than I do because of how you have your output. But I think there is this idea that people feel entitled to like your output. I think it's like if they get your podcast for free, they expect you to get other stuff for free, but it's like you're not getting the podcast for free because someone's got to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be the advertisers. If it's not the consumer who's watching through the pitches, it's going to be advertisers. You can't have it, both ways. And I think overwhelmingly people are more than happy to be like, okay, you got to pay the bills, and they're kind of used to it. So one of the things
I have a website that I launched earlier this year that it costs $300,000 a year to run it. It's a membership that has done an enormous amount to help an awful lot of people, but it's expensive to run because there's a lot of one-on-one or small group interaction. Yeah. It's my School of Life thing. So it's tomschooloflife.com. That costs me $300,000 a year to run. So I'm sorry, folks, I have to charge for that. You understand? I have to charge for that. But on the other hand, what I'm charging is so absurdly de minimis compared to what you're getting in return. So when I deal with people who say, I like what you're offering, but I think it's a little too pricey. I get that. If it's too pricey for you, that's okay. Maybe you save up for it. Fair enough. And I can accept that. But if I get you should charge less, okay, you come on this side and tell me how you're going to run a 300K site while charging less. If you have a business plan, I'm all ears.
I got to tell you, I have Dave Smith on all the time and lots of other guests like this. I'm surprised having you on this week is making this the most Jewish episode of the year. I can say it. I can say it. Tom, while we're talking about things that we're looking forward to next year, one of the things that we should all be concerned about is hedging against inflation. Deutsche Bank, Citi, and Morgan Stanley, they're all forecasting another 25% plunge in the stock market. And the only break in inflation is with a recession. Over 80% of retirees are concerned about inflation and are very concerned about the stock market. And the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, said, I believe the economy is the biggest bubble in history. God have mercy on us all. And Kiyosaki, who bought more gold, is predicting $3,000 an ounce gold in a year. In 2008, the stock market and housing market crash. Meanwhile, gold went from 800 an ounce to 1,600 over the next 2.5 years. And that could be why Kiyosaki is forecasting $3,000 an ounce for gold. And billionaire economists agree on two things. One, we're heading toward a recession. And two, investors need to buy gold. So what you can do is call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. You call 888-505-9845. Mention my name. That's Michael Malice. Or go to patriotgoldgroup.com/P/Michael-Malice, and you'll get best-in-class service from Patriots Protecting Patriots. They have a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA 401k can be in physical gold or silver. You can be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA and qualifying rollovers. Call 888-505-9845 or go to patriotgoldgroup.com/P/Michael-Malice for a free investor guide today. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 6 years in a row. All you got to do is call 888-505-9845, mention Michael Malice, or go to patriotgoldgroup.com/P/Michael-Malice, and you can protect your money. Let's get back to the show. I want to hear we didn't talk about this when it happened a couple of months ago, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. I was on the Blaze on election night, and they were expecting a red tsunami, even though freely, I think most, if not all of those hosts will acknowledge that having a Republican Congress is not at all going to be moving the needle in a direction they would want. If anything, at best, they were hoping for putting a break on the Biden administration, which, if you ask some of the panelists, is the worst president in history. By what metric, I don't know, other than it's happening now. And when that didn't happen, it was like being at a funeral, which I could understand their disappointment, but they really thought, America is doomed. And my perspective is, if you think Biden and the people behind him are capable of destroying this country in 2 years, you are not a patriot. And America's already, if it's just going to take a little poke and it's done, it's done. Like there's
Yeah.
no salvaging this patient. That's not my perspective at all. I don't see this country as being destroyed within 2 years, certainly not by the Biden administration. What
Right.
was your reaction to Election Day? And is that something that, and what were you thinking and how did it end up happening?
Well, I did think it would turn out better for the Republicans, and it did. I don't think I'm very alone in that. But I don't think it means, therefore, that America is doomed or anything like this. But in defense of people who were in despair, I think a more plausible line of argument is, given what happened over the past 2 years, since
Yeah.
the last time we had a congressional election, these people needed to be punished.
Yeah.
These people needed to be punished for there to be an example set for all time that these sorts of things would not be done to us again. And the fact that they weren't punished, or even that some of these governors who, were some of the worst governors got reelected, well, that's demoralizing. It doesn't necessarily mean the country is doomed, but it's demoralizing.
That's
If
fair.
these people don't deserve to be punished, who does?
Well, so I mean, are you demoralized as a result of the elections?
I'm somewhat demoralized, and yet I've spent the last 2 years saying the experience with COVID has drastically lowered my estimate of mankind. It's almost down to where it is for Michael Malice at this point. And yet I watch these results and I'm thinking, doggone it, my expectations of mankind have become even lower. I guess I should have expected that after what I've seen. On the other hand, of course, it was great to see, the results for DeSantis, who, he stood up again. I mean, he wasn't perfect. I know that. But he very ostentatiously stood against this. And I would say, incidentally, that a related white pill here is the continued presence of his Surgeon General, Joseph Ladapo, who has been willing to stand against everybody. He's willing to talk about, you're not even supposed to talk about vaccine injuries. Yes, we know in principle they exist. We know that in principle they exist. But the vaccine injured are just an uncomfortable group for us trying to, perpetuate the narrative. They're going to encourage, quote, vaccine hesitancy. So I just, as a matter of fact, on the Tom Woods Show, interviewed a documentary filmmaker who made a film. It's called Anecdotals, and you can watch it they're not even charging for it. Anecdotalsmovie.com. And it's
You need
about,
to sit them down and be like, look, you need a mailing list. You need to be selling them how to sort out your inbox. These dummies, they're frauds.
But
Control
there are
opposition.
times when it makes sense to just give things away, as indeed I do. And this is one of those times. And in that documentary, they talk about ordinary people who really are not political, but their lives were turned upside down, and their friends have turned their backs on them because, some of their friends are Democrats, and they feel like, but the vaccines are safe and effective, and if I say anything that goes to the contrary, I'm going to undermine our confidence in them. And so their friends are just kind of left hanging out to dry. They can't tell their stories on social media because they get suppressed, even though they're true. And so Ladapo is somebody who speaks for these people. And he was the only state surgeon general I know of over the past couple of years who said, by the way, if you want to avoid COVID, some things you can do are getting some sunshine, having a good diet, exercise, common sense things. And the media has gone after him like crazy, and he has just grinned his way through it because he just doesn't care.
Do you know what my biggest white pill of the moment is? And I'm sure you're going to agree with me. Maybe that's the biggest, but something that you find very hopeful. I'm not saying at all that people should think Elon Musk is a good person, have faith in him, so on and so
Right.
forth. If someone's a villain and for example, the pro DeSantis argument, I'm comfortable being of the belief that DeSantis is a complete sociopath doing things that I approve of.
Yeah.
And that he cannot be relied on. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care if
As
he
soon
believes
as
in these things.
As soon as he starts doing things that I don't like, I'll abandon him. But right now, he's doing good things. Same thing with Elon Musk. As soon as he turns around and reveals his wicked self, okay, then I'll jump off the bandwagon. But right now, he is doing vastly more good than any elected Republican official.
By far. And what I love what he's done with Twitter is he's made it a place where corporate journalists, and they've started screaming about this en masse, do not feel like they're a protected class anymore. Something that he did, I got, he suspended a few of these types for a few days, and he's saying you can't send out links to Mastodon, so on and so forth. It's only a day or two. Point being, they don't feel invincible anymore. They feel like the rest of us felt, including myself and including you, certainly. You're still not I'm not trying to say this is a dig. You're still not verified, correct? No, the reason is there's a different metric. My understanding is if you're verified to get suspended, they have to have a meeting. Whereas if you weren't verified, any person who's monitoring it at any moment could do it. James Lindsay was not verified, for example. So this was a layer of protection that journalists and people like myself had, where I felt a bit safer. Obviously, that's changed now with the verification program, but they had it so you really were in much more a dangerous position than I had been over the last few years. And frankly, given your output, especially with having to do with COVID, you're lucky that they never took you out. I'm sure you were worrying about that constantly.
Oh yeah, and I have seen people get taken out for things that are far more benign than things I've posted. So the whole thing seems quite arbitrary.
Right.
I've had several, well, more than several. I've had several YouTube videos taken down that were not video. You know, they're just the audio of my show.
Sure.
That's fair enough. But what it really did was it meant that from that point on, I would ask myself, do I put this episode on YouTube or not? And sometimes I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But then because I have a big mailing list, because I worked hard at that, the episodes that don't go on YouTube, I send a special bulletin to all the, many, many people on my list. And that way I can keep the listening numbers up, because I'm going to lose it's not that many who watch on YouTube. It's, 2,000-3,000 per episode, but I can make those up by directly sending it out to my list. But yeah, that was to lose, I don't spend as much time on Twitter as some of my friends do. You're one of my friends. But
Yeah.
I'm still happy to have 155,000 followers, and it would make me sad to lose those. Yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I did have to measure my words a little bit. Who the hell wants to do that?
It's great because there's this journalist in Canada named Rachel Gilmore, and Canadian journalists are much more malevolent than American journalists because they're funded by the state partly.
Yeah.
So they really are apparatuses and apparatchiks for the governing regime. So she had some TikTok where she was complaining about the deluge of hatred that she gets every day, where she's being acknowledged to be a complete liar, demon, so on and so forth, and other things. So since I've got 15 times the followers than she has, and now that I see that she's at least the thing that's great, and I say this is my sadistic Soviet side, is when you had 2 or 3 of them, these in their subculture, being a victim is currency, right? It's a status symbol. Everyone's bullying me. I'm being treated poorly. Everyone rallies around them. Oh, you poor baby, whatever. If you have the entire class who are complaining about how they're being called and their antics and being identified as monsters and enemies of the people, suddenly you don't have the competitive advantage of being the one who's the current pariah. Yeah. So she was complaining, thinking she's going to have this kind of cavalcade come to her defense. It did not happen. So every day I'm, see her, I just nuke her and nuke her and nuke her. And it's really kind of fun because she's getting ratioed every single time. She's complaining to her audience, but then my audience comes in and swarms them. It's a beautiful thing to realize that this person is, I think this was a Saul Alinsky tactic or Clausewitz. I don't remember which one it was. But one of them, or no, this is from pickup artists, isolate the target. So when you have someone who's a target and you take them away from their support mechanism, all of a sudden they don't know what to do, because for decades, these corporate journalists have been spewing their nonsense because they've all been colluding with each other. So as soon as something happens to one, the others jump in and so on and so forth. But now if they're isolated, that's not in the handbook and they don't know what to do, but they're not particularly impressive or innovative people.
Yeah, we have got about the least impressive ruling class in the history of the world, I would say, in terms
it's
of
Habsburg level.
Yeah, in terms of intellect and everything else, and they're just utterly unimpressive. I want to, before I forget, I want to mention another thing that made me happy this year, and it had to do with my friends. I mean, I've been glad to see, as I said, anything that extends the reach of you and Dave is an unambiguous good to me. But another related thing that happened was had to do with a person you've had on your welcome, and that is Eric July. Eric July launched his own comic book company this year, surrounded by naysayers and critics and trolls and whatever, and this will never fly and whatever. And it pulled in 7 figures in one day. And by the time the campaign was over, it was between $3.5 and $4 million. So this thing is a going concern. His Rippaverse, it did extremely well. And it's not just that the way Fox News pitched it was, Eric July launched a non-woke comic book company, which indeed he did. But that's only a part of it. I mean, his view also was that the major companies were just getting lazy in terms of ideas. He says, in my comic book world, when things happen, they happen permanently, and you can't get around them by, oh, the character found a time machine and went back and changed the trajectory. Now, come on, that's just laziness. You know, there are going to be certain rules that govern my world in the Rippaverse. And to see him have that kind of success, but then also be really effective on Twitter, trolling his trolls and monetizing his haters. It was a fantastic thing to observe, and I was so thrilled for him. I've sent out a message to my newsletter list, and you know, he doesn't advertise with me. He doesn't have an affiliate program, but he's my friend, and he was in the midst of a massive, massive win. And I just wanted to be part of it. I told my folks, you go out and you be part of this by grabbing some stuff. I grabbed some merch before I even read the book because I just knew it was good. I knew it's Eric. So, I mean, again, imagine trying to do that before you had these resources. I mean, that is a white pill. Eric accomplished something that would have been almost infinitely more difficult to do 30 years ago.
I am a big comic book fan. I grew up on DC. I've read like every DC comic up to like whatever certain year because I downloaded them all. And I don't think you appreciate to what extent they're recycling past ideas. This past week, as we record, the first they had something in 1985 called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was basically this huge crossover of 50 years of characters and they're all fighting together. They had a toned down version of that in 94, I believe, called 0 Hour, where Parallax, who's this character, goes back to the beginning of time and tries to restart the universes, right? And all the issues were relaunched with issue 0. And now this week they concluded Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it's literally the same exact story. There's this character, Pariah. His name is Pariah. Instead of being Green Lantern, he's possessed by the Great Darkness and he tries to restart the universe. And he's kind of defeated, but now it's restarted and there's infinite Earths with multiple timelines in each one. And it's just like, this is literally the same exact story. You're not even pretending why this guy's a villain. Because he's possessed. There's not even a pretense of, you know, character motivation or, you know, what he's fighting for. It's just, and it's kind of like you grow old. I guess, you know, you have to be a certain age to read comic books. But if you follow it for over 20 years, you're like, this is just completely cyclical. How many times is, you know, the Joker going to break out of jail and go on a crime spree and then blah, 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 blah. He's put away. It's just kind of absurd and awful. So it's just exciting to see. This is the one thing that they do change. And this is my complete comic book guy trigger. I'll break it down for you as someone who's not a comic book fan, but just drives me so crazy. My absolute favorite comic book series was called The Legion of Superheroes. It takes place in the end of the 30th century. It's 1,000 years in the future, right? And there was, I think, 50 members of this Legion. Each was from a different planet. And you have Shadowlass, who's blue, and Brainiac 5, who's green. And you had Quislet, who's like a little energy being in a spaceship. And Chameleon Boy is orange. I mean, aliens. They're aliens. And they restarted again. And all of a sudden, Lightning Lad is black or African American or African. It's just like, you have literally all the colors of the rainbow. Like, it's so diverse already. And you have Invisible Kid as black, but you just the only changes you're making is somehow we have to make it more diverse, even though this is literally the most diverse series in any comic book history. It's just, I can imagine how, as a reader, it's just like, we get it. Okay, enough. Just tell good stories. And they can't.
Right.
Folks, Michael Malice here, and I want to talk to you about Omaha Steaks. And Omaha Steaks were very smart because they sent me their product and I had them cooked for me. I don't know how to cook, and I enjoyed them. It was a really great way to have a dinner with a bunch of friends all together. And the holidays are here, and you can achieve gifting greatness when you give the gift of perfectly aged, tender, and delicious Omaha Steaks. I can vouch for their deliciousness. Omaha Steaks have put together a delicious selection of various gift packages to make shopping for the ones you love nice and easy. You just got to go to omahasteaks.com and take advantage of their 50% off site-wide order. Plus, if you use the code MALICE at checkout, you get another $4 off your order. So they have everything you need to give a gift that's simply perfect. You got a butcher's cut fillets, air-chilled boneless chicken, juicy burgers, and they've got comfort meals that are ready to flash. Order today, beat the shipping rush. You go to omahasteaks.com and use promo code MALICE at checkout. Omaha Steaks is a gift from the heart, a gift that will be remembered with every unforgettable bite. You can order with complete confidence today, knowing you're ordering the very best. Visit omahasteaks.com Take advantage of 50% off site-wide, plus use promo code Malice to check out. You get another $40 off your order. Minimum order may be required. Folks, You're Welcome with Michael Malice is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Now, most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, when you're listening to me and Tom talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing right now, which is getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy. You could save money, do it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Let's get back to the show.
And incidentally, tell a good story is something that, I would like libertarians to take to heart, because, even though Eric has a band, Backwards, and the first album they put out, Veracity, did quite well. I mean, on the hard rock charts of Billboard, it hit number 5. I mean, they did pretty well. And there were libertarian themes all over it. But in this book series, I'm not so sure that he's trying to make it pedagogical. He's just trying to make a good story. And sometimes it kind of annoys me when some libertarians just can't shut off, so I'll say I saw some movie and they'll say, oh, was it a libertarian movie? Well, that's not the primary reason I go to the movies. I'm a libertarian almost like for a living, and I'm very happy to turn off when I go to the movies. I just want a really good story. And unfortunately, I think sometimes with some creative libertarian projects, they think, well, we're so outnumbered that if we create something artistically, it better bash people over the head, propagandistically, because this is the only chance we get. And I just think that falls flat.
Yeah, absolutely. Even Rand, it's a very fair criticism of her. But I addressed this in the White Pill. Like, people bash Rand for her long speeches in her books, but when she published The Fountainhead, which also had long speeches, not one reviewer, not one, I think, with the exception of Lorene Pruitt from the New York Times, even acknowledged that the theme was about individualism versus collectivism. They all said, "Oh, it's a romance novel, or it's about architecture," and she's just like, I beat you over the head with it for pages. Like, the characters are spelling out in speeches, just laying it all on the table, and you're still just in one ear out the other. So,
yeah. Incidentally, I saw a pretty good video recently by a guy named Roderick Long. He's a philosophy professor at Auburn.
Yeah,
The video might be a year or two old, but it was taking on the very common claim that Ayn Rand was a bad writer. And that's just sort of taken for granted. We all know she was a bad writer, but the ideas in her books were very good. He doesn't accept that. He actually goes through and addresses some of the criticism. So it's worth looking at.
So what are you most hopeful for in terms of 2023?
Well, I suppose one thing that makes me a little sad is that there were a lot of people, you mentioned the midterms, who were demoralized to the point where they feel like they just want to give up.
Yeah.
And that makes me unhappy. I don't want to see that, because you're going to lose if you give up. That's just the way it works. So that makes me unhappy. But again, I've kind of thought to myself, I, as one person, can't fix everything that's wrong with the world, but I have a decent following and I can help those people. And so one thing that I've been really proud of this year was I started this School of Life program at the behest of an unbelievably knowledgeable business advisor named Jay Abraham. If you Google Jay Abraham, the guy is like a gazillionaire, and he's the kind of guy who, if you want to talk to him for 2 hours, it'll come to almost $20,000, but you'll make 1.2 million from the advice that he gives you. So he gave me this idea, and the idea of it is, what are the things keeping my people up at night? Is it that I wish I knew more about George Washington? I mean, I don't think so, even though I do teach stuff like that at Liberty Classroom. But is that really what's keeping them up at night? What's keeping them up at night are practical things, not I don't know enough about the non-aggression principle, but prices are going up and I don't know what to do. Or if push should come to shove and I needed to start my own business because I got fired, how would I do that? Or the place where I'm living is just suffocating me, but I don't think I can move with the budget I have. So what do I do? Or how do I get my kids educated in a world that hates me? Or just practical things to make you the best version of yourself possible.
Yeah.
So I've done sessions on how to give a good speech, how to be a better writer, all practical things. None of it is theoretical. It is all things that in the here and now can make your life better. And then we added to it a small group component, because I have thousands of members, but we have these small groups, 10, 15 people that meet every week. And all these people have a goal. Some people are trying to publish a book. Some are trying to start a business. Some are trying to lose weight. And what you find is that just as with, let's say Alcoholics Anonymous, the group makes an enormous impact on your success. Because if you run into a snag on your own, sometimes it discourages you to the point where you just give up. But you have this support network who are cheering you on, giving you new ideas all the time. You keep going. And so every week people have these finite goals that they're going to accomplish by the next week. And so again, I've got books being published, businesses being started, people getting healthier, and they're making these lifelong friends because they see the same 10 every single week. That to me, yeah, again, I can't fix the whole world, but I have made, without a doubt, a massive change in the lives of a lot of people. And so I open that up to new members just a couple times a year. The site is tomschooloflife.com. And I would have been happy if on my tombstone it said something about my ebooks or whatever, like my libertarian content. But I'm vastly happier to know that some people say that I just turned their whole lives around through this program. And not so much by me. Yeah, I launched the thing.
Yeah.
But the community that was built in it just does miracles. It does miracles. And that's the exciting thing for me going into 2023, that no matter what's going on out there in the outside world, we are nevertheless keeping our eye on the ball, focused on what can be done right now, even with Joe Biden as president, to make your life better.
You touched on something which I beat into people's heads all the time as far as I can. I am not interested particularly with associating on a personal level, professional's different, with people who necessarily agree with me. I'm interested in associating with people who make my life better and who provide a good community, who are there if I had to help get some bookcases up in my house, or if I need advice or feedback. So there's, I think, a lot of, in every community, including the libertarian community movement, there are toxic elements. And my point being, just because you agree with someone, you and I don't have the same musical taste. It's of no relevance to our friendship other than we kind of joke about it. But
yeah,
I mean, the idea that it's like, oh, I'm going to go to meet this guy, Tom Woods. Am I going to like him? Well, his favorite band is Porcupine Tree. Like what? But I mean, do you understand the non sequitur?
right.
And it's just like, the inverse is sometimes true. Oh, am I going to like this guy? He's an anarchist. You think, okay, maybe he's mentally wired to see things in the same way I am, especially because it's something that's unusual. So it's going to take a little bit of the kind of a entry fee to have that point of view. But in and of itself, just because someone is a fellow traveler, that does not mean or imply at all that this person is going to make your life better, or they're not going to be an enormous net negative. And the biggest thing that I would tell people to try to divest themselves of is cynicism, and this idea of like never taking the win. It's all going to, it's that sarcastic Keynesian line about how in the long run we're all dead. It's just like, it's very, very hard to stay defeatist, because as soon as there's like one counter argument, your whole hypothesis has been disproven. As soon as there's this one time where good things happen, your assertion that good things never happen, if they do, they don't really count, has been disproven. So they have to work very hard to make sure that anything that is positive in your life has to be undermined or dismissed. And that to me is probably the worst almost kind of person to have in your personal life.
Yeah. So some of the friends I have are not 100% ideologically aligned with me, as you say. But I can say that 100% of my friends are not defeatists, because I can't deal with that mentally. I take a lot of slings and arrows as it is. And then when I'm relaxing with friends, I don't want to be dealing with it there also. You can take that somewhere else or take it to a therapist's couch, but not to me.
You are a doctor in history. You did just mention George Washington. I thought this would be a fun opportunity. What are some things people don't realize about George Washington? Because we just know the propaganda. There's got to be like a quick 2 minutes you could tell us that Well, your Facebook friends are wrong about George Washington. What are we wrong about?
Well, with George Washington, I would just note that a couple of things that I suppose probably people do know, but they don't realize the full significance of it. And the primary one is, of course, that at the end of the American Revolution, he just goes back to his home. And we think, oh, isn't that sweet? That's George Washington for you. But what we need to realize is that is not the norm. That is not what ordinarily happens in that situation. The victorious general then becomes, the czar or the dictator, or whatever.
And he earned it.
I beg your pardon?
And he earned it, right? You can make the argument very easily, like, I saved this country, I deserve to be czar. You can wrap your head around that.
That's right. That's right. And of course, part of the when the Constitution was being drafted and they were thinking about the presidential office, it's not as precisely laid out as Congress is in there. And I think that's partly because people thought, well, probably George Washington will be the president. And, we all know him, right? We can rely on him. But that is an extraordinary thing. I mean, ultimately, looking over his career, it is said that the King of England said something along the lines of, he really is the greatest man in the world. And then, of course, he voluntarily relinquishes power when he could have surely had a third term, because he thought I don't want to leave that kind of example to people. Well, that's an amazing thing. That's one of the reasons that the United States went on a trajectory different from so many of the tragic ones around the world. So I won't hear putting down George Washington. He is sometimes our heroes need to be debunked, but I don't think he's one of them.
It's really kind of funny because there's certain things that you and I, when we're told, we just kind of lose it disproportionately. And with you, I think it's when people, any criticism of any company, people like, it's a private company, they do what they want, as if like Yelp shouldn't exist or is a violation of the NAP. Right. I mentioned to Dr. Drew the theory, which I'm not particularly informed about, that George Washington had Klinefelter syndrome, that he was XXY, because he was very tall for his time period. He was 6'3", I think, even then. He didn't have any kids. It was Martha Washington's kids. And Dr. Drew lost his crap. He was so triggered. This was the issue where you press it. He's like, oh my God, that's so much. Like, he just went on, and he clearly thought about it. And this bothered him as a doctor to like his core. And he really went on this whole almost Tom Woodsian like rant where I just sat there and I'm like, I'm trolling you, but I'm not trying to. I just threw this out. And he just like, of all the things you would think would upset someone like a Dr. Drew, that like the hypothesis that George Washington was, had XXY. That was the one that got him. It was hilarious.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because some of the things you're saying are quite startling. I mean, we can have a society without a state. Yeah, I have a few questions I might want to ask you. Well, here's this hypothesis about George Washington. I wouldn't think that would be the thing, but isn't it funny that it is?
He just kept going and going and going. And I'm sitting there like, I don't have a dog in this fight. He's dead. He did not have kids, whether through choice or heredity or whatever it was. I don't care. So it was really, if George Washington shouldn't be knocked off his pedestal, so to speak, possibly literally nowadays, are you in agreement with me that Jefferson is overrated?
Why are you keeping this to the end of the show?
Because it just came up. What do you mean?
No, I think there are parts of Jefferson that I wish were different. I'll put it that way. And I think it's a case where the Jeffersonians are better than Jefferson. So by that, I mean, if you look at Russell Kirk, actually, the best thing Russell Kirk ever did, because don't tell Brad Berzer, but Russell Kirk kind of bores me. But the best thing he ever did was a biography of a guy named John Randolph of Roanoke.
Oh, yeah. Great. Can I talk? John Randolph of Roanoke, my buddy Tom Jenny told me about this when I was a Cato intern. I think he served like 1 or 2 terms. He would come on the floor of Congress with his hunting dogs, tell everyone to go F themselves, and then went back to Virginia. Like, he was a real badass.
Yeah, and as I recall, they had the Ways and Means Committee even then, and I think he headed that. Okay, and he was more of a strict constructionist even than Jefferson was, because there was an idea that began to develop, like certainly with Madison. Madison had developed the idea that it's possible, because of course Madison was against the national bank, and then he was for it. And you say, oh, he must have been a hypocrite, but the way he was thinking was, if the American people tolerate a certain constitutional interpretation, namely that a bank is acceptable for a lengthy enough time, then we have to almost consider that to be the way the Constitution needs to be interpreted. And there's no way John Randolph of Roanoke would have accepted that. So some of those people were better. John Taylor of Caroline, they were better than Jefferson. But when you read The best thing, in my opinion, I know we disagree about federalism and stuff like that, but the best encapsulation of Jefferson's political thought and how he thought the United States was set up is the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. Beautiful, pithy, right to the point about the nature of the Union and the recourses the states have. Anybody who writes that, I give him a broad pass to make other errors.
But it's just interesting because there's two Jeffersons, right? There's Jefferson the thinker and the philosopher, who is almost beyond reproach, and then there's Jefferson the politician, and he was they're almost two complete. I mean, just even psychologically, they just seem like completely different people. Like, he's in Washington's cabinet, he's leaking to the press, doing everything he can to undermine Washington, the president, inventing, being against partisan politics, then inventing partisan politics in America, basically to fight Hamilton single-handedly. The whole Louisiana Purchase thing, like, this is too good a deal to be a constructionist about. The wars and stuff. There's so many things that, as president, you're like, how is this the same guy? But someone this week tweeted something brilliant, which I was just like, bravo, where he said, if the founding fathers, including Jefferson, right, couldn't get the Constitution to work like you're envisioning, what possible chance do we have in 2022? And when you put in those terms, if even Jefferson, right, who really was a true believer in what he was saying in many ways, in almost every way, wasn't like, okay, I'm going to stick to it. Like, I was there. I was at the meetings. This isn't like, oh, let me look up what John Marshall said 50 years, right? If they couldn't get it done correctly, now, are you crazy?
My friend Kevin Gutzman, he and I wrote a book together called Who Killed the Constitution. He has a brand new book out called The Jeffersonians, where he goes through Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and some of the other characters involved. And another white pill is that it's the featured selection of the History Book Club. So if you don't mail in the little card in time, you get Kevin's book. And USA Today listed it as one of 5 books you need to read. I mean, I don't know how this is possible. But I learned in there a very odd personal detail. Maybe you knew this about Jefferson, but his wife died when he was only 39, and she made him pledge never to remarry. And indeed, he never did. And it just makes me wonder, you're dead, bitch. Why are you doing this to this poor guy?
You know what else? She's the only first lady who we don't know what she looks like.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
There's no surviving contemporary pictures, paintings of her. There is a silhouette drawing of her, which if you look on her Wikipedia, you're going to see, but we have no idea. I mean, maybe some people said she looks like this, using words, but she is the only first lady that we do not have any good idea of what she looked like. And that is not that long ago.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's right. That is interesting. I did not know that.
Do you know who the first president is that we have a photograph of?
Oh, a photograph.
That's a good trivia question. Yeah. Who's the first president that's been captured photographically? Earliest president.
Boy, that's a good question. I don't who.
I'll take your guess and I'll give you the answer. And then you have to tell me who you think the first president whose voice we have recorded is.
Well, I'm trying to think of, when I look back, I can see the images of these people, but I'm trying to remember, were they in photograph form or are they sketches?
Right.
So I mean, obviously it's got to be well before Cleveland.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have Lincoln.
Yeah. So right. Yeah. And that's definitely a photograph. Oh gosh. Well, yeah. So who? It must be not that far before Lincoln.
Oh, it is. It's Andrew Jackson.
Is it? How can that be? Is that really when it was invented?
Because he lived a long time. And the thing that's crazy about him, you know how he's always drawn with that hair, and it looks like, but his hair really was like standing straight up and just like this crazy haircut that you don't see nowadays. It's really, to me, there's such a difference between looking in his eyes versus looking at a painting of Washington. It's so different.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, now I'm thinking about, of course, it was around the time, just shortly after, or I think around the time that photography was being developed, that the Impressionist movement grew, because the thinking being, well, if you want an exact replica of the thing, you can get that by clicking this machine. So now we have a little bit more leeway to play with it and to explore the impact of light and stuff and whatever on things. Now, by the way, on Andrew Jackson, I was in Nashville last year, and we had a chance to visit the Hermitage, which is where he lived. In Tennessee. And that's an amazing experience, because you are literally standing in a house that he lived in. And I'm not, I'm not really a historian who goes for, hey, aren't you interested in what type of hat they wore in 1605? I have no interest at all. Or what type of shoe they wore. Couldn't care less. I'm generally an intellectual historian. I'm just interested in ideas. But there's no denying you're standing there in the home of Andrew Jackson. There's something irreplaceable about that. It's not enough to just look at pictures. It was very much worth a visit.
I've had in the back of my head to do a travelogue book one day called Places Where Presidents Died, and to go visit the rooms where, you know, the guy who ran the American government passed away in this room. But I suspect it's something I'm never going to get around to doing, but it's a
Good
great
idea.
idea. It's Tom, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Partly the anticipation of you asking me that question and my mental gymnastics of trying to come up with an answer while also giving answers to other questions. So I guess I'll say I was especially glad to be able to say on your show, and I don't mean this I mean this as a friend who genuinely loves you, that one of the happiest things for me about this year, in addition to my things happening in my own personal and professional life, is seeing how well you're doing. Because as I say, what's good for Michael Malice is good for America.
Merry Christmas and God bless us, everyone.